Okay, so now that the 2024 college football regular season is over, I want to talk about some players whose talent I believe was wasted this year. Today, I have 10 examples of players who I believe were wasted in college football this season, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about 10 players whose talent was wasted this year. Also, before we start the video, many of you guys are probably going to be critical down in the comment section below, so what I mean by their talent was wasted was that we didn't get to see their full potential in 2024. Some of these players got screwed over by injuries, some of them had underwhelming stat lines, and some of them put in a lot of hard work and had good numbers, but it didn't amount to wins. I don't mean any ill intent or negativity by this. These are just players who, for one reason or another, didn't live up to their full potential or didn't win many games. Okay, so the first guy whose talent was wasted was Torrey Horton. I heard about this guy all offseason long, as he was considered one of the top receivers in college football coming out of Fresno, California. Horton at one point ended up playing for Nevada and spent 2 seasons with the Wolfpack. He ended up becoming an 1,000-yard receiver in 2022 with the Rams as he had 8 touchdowns and 71 more catches. And then in 2023, he broke out with 96 catches for 1,100 yards and 8 scores. Horton was considered one of the top receivers in college football, but decided to stay put at Colorado State instead of going to another Power 4 team. Ended up biting him pretty badly, as he only had 26 catches for 353 yards and a touchdown. He did have some injury problems this year though, so there is an asterisk on it, but man, I wonder if things would have been different had he gone to another school. He probably wouldn't have gotten injured, and his stock would be much higher right now. This kind of falls into a category of something a player couldn't control, but you have to wonder if he went to another school, he probably would not have gotten hurt and would not have been forgotten about. It's a shame because Horton was such a good player. Up next, we need to talk about Devin Mockobee. He's a running back for the Purdue Boilermakers, and this guy is extremely talented. Coming out of Boonville, Indiana, Mockobee at one point was committed to Navy, but would eventually go over to Purdue as a walk-on. He was considered a 2-star recruit and had pretty much no future at Purdue, it seemed like. I mean, why would he ever see the field? Well, he ended up running for 968 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2022, 800 yards and 6 touchdowns in 2023, and then was expected to have a monster 2024 season. Sadly though, Purdue was so inept and so dysfunctional that Mockobee's talent was wasted, but he still managed to have nearly 700 yards and 4 touchdowns. I really thought this guy could have been one of the best running backs in college football, and I honestly wish he would have transferred where his skill set could have been better utilized. Mockobee is one of the only bright spots about Purdue football the last 2 years, and man, he put in all that work and effort just to win 1 game in 2024, and because of that, his NFL draft stock has fallen apart, and now you have a decision to make in 2025. Okay, while we're at it, let's go ahead and talk about another running back, and that's going to be Jaden Ott. Coming out of California, Ott was seen as one of the top running back prospects in the class of 2022, as he was a 4-star player and the number 23 overall back. He ended up running for 2,300 yards and 30 touchdowns as a senior, and Ott would end up impressing a ton in 2022. He was a freshman All-American after running for 897 yards and 8 touchdowns, and then in 2023, he followed it up with 1,300 yards and 12 scores. This past season, though, was tough for Ott, as he only ended up running for 300 yards with 4 touchdowns. He averaged 2.9 yards per carry, and a big reason for this was because he was 1 in Cal's system, and 2 ended up having some injury issues. He hurt his ankle early on, and he was just never the same player after that, and while it wasn't totally his fault, Ott has put up a ridiculous amount of yards over the last 3 years, and has barely won any football games, and has barely gotten noticed. I have to wonder how much better he would have been had he gone to a different school, and how much of a bigger name he'd be if he went to a different school. I can't help but think his talent was wasted. When you take a look at 2025 NFL mock drafts, you're going to see the name Deon Walker everywhere. At 6'6" and nearly 350 pounds, Deon Walker went to Cass Tech High School and was a 4-star recruit in the class of 2022. He'd arrive at Kentucky and would enjoy a breakout 2023 season in which he had 7.5 sacks and 55 total tackles. Because of that and his physical measurables, Deon Walker was considered a first-round talent for 2025 and one of the top returning players in the SEC. Unfortunately, Walker would take a major step back this year as he only finished with 37 tackles, 2 pass deflections, and 1.5 sacks. Kentucky also went 4-8. They weren't prepared in SEC play this season, and I can't help but think they wasted another generational defensive player. They've already had guys like Josh Allen and Jamin Davis, and to me it really feels like Deion Walker's talent was wasted this year and he was not put in the best position to succeed. Man, just 3 years ago, Harold Perkins Jr. was considered one of the best players in college football. After being a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, Perkins would arrive at LSU right away and had a monster season. He had 72 tackles with 4 pass deflections, 7.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and a pick, and was considered one of, if not the best freshman in college football in 2022. Perkins would put up a similar stat line in 2023, but in 2024, he had a disastrous season. He only ended up having 16 total tackles, did not have a sack or a forced fumble or a pass deflection. And that is thanks in large part due to an injury. Harold Perkins ended up tearing his ACL against UCLA, and right when his season was getting started, he was done. Again, this isn't LSU's fault, but his talent was wasted this year due to him tweaking his knee. I don't really know what Perkins is going to do though. He should have been a lock to be a top 10 pick at one point, but due to this injury, I do wonder if he'll come back for another year. I really have no idea, but sadly, Harold Perkins' talent was wasted this season due to an injury. Imagine you have the best running back in college football. Ollie Gordon was a 4-star recruit coming out of Texas and ended up blowing up into a monster in 2023. Gordon became the best back in college football as he finished with 1,700 yards and 21 touchdowns while averaging nearly 6.1 yards per carry. Many thought that Gordon would enter the transfer portal and go to a big-time school like Oregon or Alabama to finish out his career. But that caused a firestorm as many people were complaining about that. It looks like Gordon should have done that after all, as he came back to a dumpster fire at Oklahoma State. After winning the first 3 games, Ollie Gordon was barely utilized the first half of the season and would eventually finally get to decent numbers. He finished with 880 yards and 13 touchdowns, but man, he was put in a terrible position the first half of the season, barely won any games this year, and a guy as talented as this was completely wasted in 2024. Had he gone to a school like Oregon, I think he would have had a much better season and honestly would have been a legit Heisman contender. Instead, he had to scrape and claw to get decent stats and did not even win one game in the last 9 weeks. That's gotta be tough, and Ollie Gordon's talent was wasted this year. Speaking of guys who are the best at their position and have unbelievable potential, Arizona would completely waste Tetairoa McMillan. After coming out of Servite High School, playing alongside guys like Mason Graham and Noah Fafita, McMillan was a huge borderline 5-star recruit who would flip from Oregon over to Arizona. He caught 39 passes and 8 touchdowns as a freshman before exploding in 2023 with 90 catches for 1,400 yards and 10 scores. Coming back in 2024, McMillan was seen as a top 5 receiver in the country, but if you watched him play and just looked at his potential, he could have been considered the best receiver in college football. Despite playing for a terrible Arizona team that had an inept offense, McMillan still managed to catch 84 passes for 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns, while at times being single-handedly the whole Arizona team. For a guy who will probably be a top 10 pick this upcoming spring, Arizona completely wasted him in 2024. I can't even imagine how good he could have been at another school with a good quarterback and a good system. And it's really unfortunate because I really thought he was going to have an insane season, but you can blame the Arizona coaching staff for this. And still, despite all of this, he had incredible numbers. Up next, I'm going to throw you for a loop and talk about a player by the name of Caden Samanza. He was a redshirt freshman quarterback from Mission Viejo High School in California, and he was the starting quarterback for Ball State. He was a no-name coming out of high school, but he ended up taking over for the Cardinals this year and put up crazy numbers. He ended up finishing with 2,900 yards with 25 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and became one of the best quarterbacks in the MAC and one of the more underrated quarterbacks in all of college football. Sadly though, Caden's talent was completely wasted while he was at Ball State, as the team once again went 3-9, finished 9th in the MAC, and fired their head coach Mike New. Honestly, I would not be surprised if Caden enters the transfer portal and goes up to the Power 4 level because he has a lot of potential and showed that he is a really good player in college football with a high ceiling, and just sadly, his talent was wasted by Ball State in 2024. There were honestly a couple running backs whose talent was wasted in 2024, and RJ Harvey is the last one we're going to talk about. After originally being at Virginia, Harvey would transfer over to UCF, where he'd enjoy a breakout 2023 season in which he rushed for 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns. He could have went off to the NFL or transferred, but instead decided to stay back at UCF, where the season was a disaster for UCF. Despite running for nearly 1,600 yards and 22 touchdowns, Harvey and the Knights only ended up winning 4 games, and UCF completely fell apart. They finished 13th in the Big 12, they couldn't figure out the quarterback position, Gus Malzahn was fired, and RJ Harvey's hard work and big-time numbers were not utilized. They couldn't even make a bowl game, and I have to wonder if, just like Ollie Gordon or Jaden Ott, how much better he would have been if he went to a better school and had the opportunity to maybe help a team win a national championship. Okay, so for our final player, I'm probably going to get rocks thrown at. As many of you guys know, I am a diehard Mizzou fan, and Luther Burden III is one of the best receivers in school history, but I can't help but think Mizzou kind of wasted his talent this year. While Burden did finish with 61 catches for 676 yards and 6 touchdowns, they really struggled to get him the ball at times. He didn't really get that many touches, he wasn't the focal point of the offense, and despite maybe having the best vision of any receiver in college football over the last few years, Burden's numbers were always underwhelming at Mizzou, I thought. It's definitely an interesting situation, as he will go down as one of the best receivers in school history, and will still likely be a top 15 draft pick, but I do wonder if the 5-star recruit would have gone to a school like Georgia or Alabama or Oregon or Ohio State, if he would have had even better numbers and would have been better utilized. I'm obviously super happy he went to Mizzou, but I think the Tigers kind of wasted his talent and didn't do enough to get him the ball, and he could have been a lot better and done a lot more. But what do you guys think? Do you think I was a little bit too harsh in this video? Who's another player whose talent was wasted in 2024? And what other topic or list style video should I do next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.